Hi. Today we're talking about a story that sounds like a sci-fi thriller, but I promise, it's real history. Ever hear the one about the CIA, some army officers, and a guy who figured out how to meditate people out of their bodies? No, it's not the setup to a bad joke. It's the true tale of the Monroe Institute and how its mind-bending techniques enticed government agencies at the highest levels. Our story begins in the 1950s with a man named Robert Monroe, a successful radio broadcasting executive. Monroe wasn't looking to get spooky with the supernatural at first. He was actually trying to see if people could learn stuff in their sleep. You know, the classic, listen to French overnight and wake up bilingual idea. So there he was in 1956. Tinkering with weird audio patterns to improve memory during sleep. And then something really weird happened. Monroe started popping out of his body. Instead of floating on a cloud of new knowledge, he found himself literally floating near the ceiling, looking down at his sleeping body. He felt vibrations, a sense of whoa, and realized he was having full-on, out-of-body experiences. Or OBEs for short. Imagine, one night you're doing your normal bedtime experiment, the next you're astral projecting like Doctor Strange. Monroe was understandably concerned, and probably checking if someone spiked his evening cocoa. But to his credit, he didn't just freak out. He took notes. A lot of notes. He kept detailed diaries of these spontaneous soul travel episodes, treating the whole thing like a personal science experiment. Over a 6-week period, he kept floating out repeatedly, and these bizarre events couldn't be explained by any science he knew. Monroe eventually compiled these notes into a 1971 book titled Journeys Out of the Body, which literally put the term out-of-body experience on the map. The book became a cult classic and a kind of how-to manual for exploring consciousness beyond the physical. Monroe realized he might have stumbled onto something big, a method to induce altered states of consciousness using sound. In other words, he thought maybe certain sounds could hack the brain into doing wild things, like leaving the body or reaching deep meditative states on command. That's a pretty big career pivot, from radio producer to interdimensional travel junkie. Determined to understand and replicate his experiences, Monroe got serious about the science, or as some skeptics might say, the pseudoscience. In 1971, he founded what is now known as the Monroe Institute in Virginia. His mission? To study human consciousness with technology rather than, say, mystic rituals or psychedelic drugs. The jewel in Monroe's research crown was a technique he patented called Hemi-Sync, short for hemispheric synchronization. It might sound a bit technical, but here's the gist. Your brain has two halves, left and right, that often do their own things. Monroe's idea was to get them in sync with each other by using sound. How do you do that? With a clever audio trick, binaural beats. If you play two slightly different tones in each ear, say 210 Hz in the left ear and 200 Hz in the right, your brain gets a little confused and creates a third, phantom beat that isn't actually in the recording. In our example, the brain hears a rhythmic beat at 10 Hz, which is the difference between those tones. And 10 Hz happens to be in the alpha wave range, a brainwave state associated with chill, relaxed, meditative feelings. I think it's pretty cool. It's like an audio illusion that makes your brain start dancing to a desired rhythm. This effect is due to something neuroscientists call the frequency following response, meaning the brain's electrical activity tends to mirror rhythmic stimuli. In plain language, give your brain a beat, and it can't help but tap its foot. Monroe and his team harnessed this with Hemi-Sync tapes, essentially using sound to gently nudge people's brains into specific states, whether that's relaxed, meditative alpha waves, deeper theta waves for creative and dreamlike states, or even the verge of sleep, delta. If monks train their minds with years of meditation, think of this as a cheat code: meditation in minutes, delivered by headphones. Now, Monroe wasn't the first to discover binaural beats. They've been known since the 19th century, but he was the ultimate tinkerer who operationalized them for consciousness exploration. The Monroe Institute developed whole audio-guided exercises to lead people into these altered states. Early experiments and EEG measurements suggested that people using Hemi-Sync really did enter unusual states of consciousness on cue. We're talking measurable shifts in brainwaves and people reporting vivid experiences. By the late 70s, Monroe's Institute had a small but growing reputation. Folks interested in the human mind's frontiers, psychologists, spiritual seekers, and yes, a few members of certain three-letter agencies all began to circle around to see what was going on in rural Virginia. Monroe's timing was perfect because the world was in a bit of a consciousness craze. This was the era when meditation and yoga were seeping into Western culture. The New Age movement was in full swing, and scientists were seriously studying things like biofeedback and hypnotherapy. Still, Monroe's work stood out. He wasn't just burning incense and chanting. He had data, gadgets, and a protocol. And nothing attracts the US government's interest like something that looks potentially like a technological edge, no matter how weird it sounds. This is where it gets really interesting. By the late 1970s, Monroe's Little Consciousness Research Institute had caught the attention of none other than the US Army and the CIA. Yes, you heard that right. Intelligence officers and military researchers started showing up at the Monroe Institute, probably in their sensible suits, to see if mind hacking with sound could give them an edge over the Soviets. This was the Cold War, after all, a time when the US government was willing to try anything, no matter how fantastical, if there was a chance that the Soviets were doing it too. And rumor had it, the Soviets were deep into parapsychology and psychic research. The US didn't want to fall behind in the psychic arms race. Yes, that was a thing. The Army kicked off things with a program called Gondola-ish in the mid to late 70s. Weird name, I know. Maybe Operation Magic Carpet was already taken. Gondola-ish wasn't about training psychics, though. It was more of an intelligence sweep, gathering data on whether foreign adversaries, especially the Soviets, were dabbling in telepathy, telekinesis, and other brain-bending stuff. Think of it as the Pentagon asking, what weird psychic stuff are the Soviets doing? And do we need to start issuing tinfoil hats? Monroe's research caught their attention because it seemed to offer a technical, systematic way to explore altered states. And if the Soviets were in the psychic game, America sure wasn't about to sit it out. That curiosity eventually led to deeper programs, like Center Lane and Stargate, where things got real. During this period, the military began sending soldiers to train at the Monroe Institute to test what Monroe called the gateway process. This wasn't a joke, it was a real, government-funded experiment in mental exploration. They brought in Army personnel, and some people from intelligence too, and put them through Monroe's audio-guided consciousness training, hoping to unlock latent superpowers, or at least make these people mentally sharper. Picture a group of military guys lying down in a darkened room, headphones on, listening to trippy Hemi-Sync tapes guiding them to reach Focus 10, Focus 12, trying to achieve out-of-body experiences, all while official observers took notes and EEG readings. It sounds like a scene out of the X-Files, but it really did happen. They kept this very methodical. Sessions were tightly controlled, with all sorts of measurements and logs. Participants would listen, relax, enter deep altered states, if they could, and then document whatever happened. Visions, feelings, maybe the occasional "I met an alien." One can only imagine what the coffee breaks were like. The central question driving all this was dead serious. Could these mind techniques give the US a strategic advantage? Could a soldier using Hemi-Sync learn faster, stay calmer under stress, withstand torture, or even, and this was the holy grail, gather intelligence psychically, like remote viewing an enemy base or locating hostages with just the mind? It was a long shot, but not too long for Uncle Sam to bankroll it. Now I understand that this all sounds unbelievable, but the declassified documents are out there to prove it. The CIA's 1983 report on the Gateway Program, written by Army Lieutenant Colonel Wayne M. McDonnell, is infamous in certain circles. Why? Because McDonnell's analysis reads like part neuroscience paper and part science fiction. In that report, titled Analysis and Assessment of Gateway Process, he goes through how the whole thing works, and then, with a straight face, suggests that if you train hard enough, your consciousness might escape the confines of space and time. Yes, the report seriously talks about the possibility of transcending time-space boundaries and even contacting non-corporeal intelligences out there in the universe. Essentially, the US Army considered the idea that you could become Doctor Strange for real. You can imagine how this tidbit fuels countless conspiracy theories and Reddit threads even today. It's like the CIA accidentally published a script to a Marvel movie, and it's kind of hilarious and mind-blowing at the same time. I mean, picture some suit and tie CIA analysts in 1983 earnestly discussing how meditation might let agents talk to ghosts or time travel. It sounds ridiculous, but it happened. The report even references ideas like a universal hologram and synchronizing with the Earth's magnetic field. This is where the idiot part of me imagines a general saying, "Gentlemen, we must harness the Force before the Reds do." However, lest you think the whole thing was just woo-woo fantasies, McDonnell's report also had some solid, sober conclusions. The CIA's interest wasn't purely philosophical. They wanted to see measurable benefits. And indeed, the report noted some down-to-earth advantages. For one, the Hemi-Sync techniques clearly could induce deep relaxation and reduce stress, basically quieting the autonomic nervous system's fight or flight response. Participants often became very calm and focused. It also found that using Hemi-Sync tended to increase symmetry between the brain hemispheres, hence the name, which some researchers think correlates with things like improved intuition and problem-solving under pressure. These are good things if you're, say, an analyst or soldier in a high-stress situation. So yes, the CIA concluded that, hey, this stuff can actually chill people out and maybe enhance certain cognitive skills. On the flip side though, what about the big claims? Psychic spying, out-of-body espionage? Well, results didn't map to comic book superpowers. According to later accounts, only a small percentage of the test subjects in the Gateway program ever reported truly dramatic psychic abilities. Maybe 5 to 10 had significant out-of-body or clairvoyant experiences. And even those were often hit or miss. One day a guy might feel like he visited a secret facility in his mind. The next day, nothing. Not exactly the reliable intel gathering method the Pentagon would stake a war on. As McDonnell himself noted, a lot of the wild stuff remained unproven. It was intriguing, but not repeatable on demand. In short, no, we did not end up with battalions of psychic soldiers. Bummer, I know. The US military ultimately shelved these programs as the Cold War wound down and as skepticism rightly grew. By the mid-1980s, funding and interest shifted, and the gateway tapes got tucked away from official use. At least that's what they tell you. Some former insiders, like Joseph McMonigal, who was remote viewer number 1, went on record saying the military is interested in it if it works, and implied that it never totally disappeared. And get this, in 2022, a sleep optimization study using gateway methods was conducted by a Department of Defense contractor, with participants wearing biometric sensors at night after doing Monroe-style sessions. That's not exactly backyard meditation anymore. But that's not the end of the story, not by a long shot. So what happened after the spooky cool gateway project closed up shop? Interestingly, Robert Monroe and his institute kept right on doing their thing. In fact, freed from the shroud of classified projects, the Monroe Institute expanded its reach and research. They welcomed the general public. Regular people could now come out to Virginia and attend the same gateway voyage programs that had once been limited to spies and soldiers. Over the decades, tens of thousands of people have gone through these multi-day retreats, training their minds with Hemi-Sync, just like the participants in the secret programs did. It's kind of like a movie plot, where yesterday's military experiment becomes tomorrow's wellness trend. And yes, Monroe Institute shifted more toward wellness, personal development, and scientific collaboration. They weren't content just selling some meditation tapes. They conducted and published research to legitimize their methods. For example, in 2001, a study found that people listening to Hemi-Sync with alpha frequency beats showed significant improvements in attention and reductions in anxiety, along with clear changes in their brain waves as measured by EEG. In recent years, they've partnered with universities, like the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies, to investigate things like brain activity during alleged psychic or healing phenomena. Yes, the Monroe Institute went from fully fringe to let's bring in the PhDs and test this properly. They've wired people up, crunched data, and presented findings. For instance, showing specific audio patterns might enhance creative thinking or help with emotional processing. They also diversified what they do. Beyond the classic out-of-body and consciousness expansion stuff, Monroe courses delved into practical applications, programs for trauma recovery and PTSD, exercises for better sleep, focus, even heart-brain coherence, which is a fancy way to describe syncing your physiological stress responses with your mind. Basically, if there's a way sound could help it, they're interested. And with the rise of smartphone apps and streaming, Monroe Institute hopped on that train too. They released the Expand app and Hemi-Sync Unlimited subscription, offering guided meditations and brainwave audio to anyone with a phone. You can lie in bed with headphones and do a gateway-esque session yourself nowadays. The crazy thing is, this stuff is really popular. Believe it or not, the Monroe Institute is busier than ever. Since the pandemic, interest in meditation and altered states exploded, and Monroe's legacy rode that wave big time. According to a recent report, since 2022, over 12,500 people have attended Monroe's Gateway programs, either online or in person. In 2025 alone, they ran 80 in-person, week-long retreats, each with about 20 participants, and had to declare the campus fully booked for the first time in history. They even started hosting programs internationally, in Europe and elsewhere, to meet demand. And their phone app has been downloaded over 380,000 times. So the next time someone does a guided meditation on their phone, they might unwittingly be doing a casual version of a once classified CIA training technique. How's that for coming full circle? And behind the scenes, there's low-key evidence that people in government still are interested. Monroe staff say active duty service members continue to attend retreats on their own dime. There's also speculation that modern brain optimization or stress regulation programs in the military are using bioacoustic entrainment, a suspiciously technical term that smells a lot like Gateway with a new coat of paint. DARPA, for example, has funded research into non-invasive neurostimulation and consciousness expansion tools. Coincidence? Well, I don't believe in those. Or maybe Gateway didn't die, it just got better at hiding. Rumors persist that the Monroe Institute techniques caught the eye of other agencies. Maybe even the NSA looked at Hemi-Sync to help resist interrogation stress, or that the FBI might have dabbled in it too. There's no hard proof publicly, so take it with a grain of salt, but it wouldn't be shocking. The US government proved one thing in this saga. They'll explore even the strangest of possibilities if there's a chance of a payoff. And Monroe's methods did have some payoff, at least for relaxation and focus, which are valuable in many high-pressure fields. So what do we make of all of this? The story of the Monroe Institute's rise from one man's out-of-body adventures to hosting secret CIA programs and finally to mainstream popularity is, in a word, astonishing. It's got a bit of everything: Cold War paranoia, genuine scientific curiosity, spiritual mystique, and a cast of characters ranging from mystics to military officers. It's a reminder of a fascinating moment in history when the boundaries between science, military strategy, and the exploration of consciousness got really blurry. The US government literally sent its people to train in meditation and psychic techniques, and took it seriously enough to write dense reports about holographic universes and the power of the mind. And whether you're a skeptic or a true believer, the Monroe methods have endured. People today use them for everything from overcoming personal trauma to seeking enlightenment, or just out of sheer curiosity about what their consciousness can do. The Monroe Institute likes to talk about the global awakening of human consciousness. Lofty words, but given how many are now experimenting with these techniques worldwide, maybe it's not that far-fetched. At the very least, Monroe opened a door for tens of thousands of people to explore their minds in ways they never thought possible, and did so by bridging the gap between the mystical and the scientific. As we wrap up, consider this. A half-century ago, the idea of using sound to tap into hidden corners of the mind was fringe science, borderline laughable to many. Yet it quietly attracted some of the brightest and certainly most paranoid minds in government. Today, those same concepts are a tap away on your phone, and society largely accepts meditation and brainwave entrainment without batting an eye. We still might not fully understand the limits of consciousness, but thanks to pioneers like Monroe, and oddly enough, the CIA, we've had a real head start in trying to figure it out. So next time you put on some ambient beats to relax or focus, remember, you're walking in the footsteps of spies and soldiers. What was once a top secret military quest could now just be your Tuesday night relaxation routine. Stranger things have happened, and in this story, they actually did. Stay curious, stay open-minded, and as Robert Monroe might say, we are more than our physical bodies. Until next time, keep exploring the unknown. Who knows what you might discover in your own consciousness? Oh, and one last thing before I go. Several FOIA, or Freedom of Information Act, requests filed in the last few years mention gateway techniques under modern project headings. Names redacted, of course. But if you've got an Aura reader and a Freedom of Information Act form, who knows what you'll uncover? Gateway might be classified again, but only because reality hasn't caught up to it yet.